Hi, everybody. My name is Peter. I follow Jesus. I'm in recovery for food addiction.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, big thanks to the food team. You guys are consistently good every week. I don't do that. Candy asked me to say something about Bible Dig-In, which is a week from this Saturday. So this is a shameless plug. Alice and I feel very passionate about this because the Word of God is important. Really, it's the only thing that God cares more about than His name. That's scriptural. And I'm hoping that the CR attendees will come to the forefront of church example and leadership here at ABC, such that people will begin to kind of say, wow, cool things are happening at CR, and I'd like to be a part of that. Or better, I'd like to be in the middle of that. A dig-in is a format that is effective because you, the participant, do the discovery, and it's exciting. It's not that a teacher is going to tell you what to think, okay? So really, how much do you internalize after that kind of a situation anyway? I don't mean to dig in. I mean having somebody tell you what to think. You can't really say that you were in a Bible study just because you attended church and you heard the pastor teach on a certain passage. You know, that's akin to going to chemistry class when you're in college. Very passive. You know, you're not really participating. In the dig-in, you come up with your own questions about the text and you draw your own conclusions about the text. And it's very empowering. And I am constantly shocked and appalled at the things that people come up with. It's just amazing, cool things that people come up with. You may find yourself memorizing scripture. And I personally believe that this is the way that the Bible was meant to be read in the context of all of us together. Okay, not someone dictating to you what it is. And it's my hope and my prayer, I have been praying about this, that your heart will burn just the way those on the Emmaus Road, they had their hearts burning, it says, when they heard Jesus expound the scriptures that was speaking of him. Now, some may say, well, it's 5 hours on a Saturday. I couldn't possibly attend something like that. To which I reply, nonsense. Take the time to read. He took the time to bleed. Okay, now the second thing I did want to say tonight is this. And I don't know why, I just felt like saying this. But you know, when I get up here to do these talks at CR, it's kind of a tricky thing. And really, I'm hoping that I can speak heart to heart. Because there's always a temptation in this kind of a situation to get up and speak beyond the realm of my own experience. And I really do not want to come off as some kind of a pompous ass or a know-it-all spewing out information as if, like you were attending chemistry. And I don't want you to feel like this is entertainment. I'm hopeful that you will be challenged by what we talk about and encouraged also. Because what I know is that what doesn't come from the heart doesn't reach the heart. Whereas what comes from personal experience, and believe me, I've made all the mistakes, and a sincere desire to help another person is what really reaches the heart. So anyway, I'm just another bozo on the bus, and I hope you guys know that. To that end, I know that Candy and I both spend a lot of time preparing for these talks. And I wouldn't presume to get up in front of you and just wing it, because I think that's very disrespectful. I do want to be of service to you by way of clear communication of important information. Okay, that's it. Principle 6 says this: evaluate my relationships, forgive those who have hurt me, and ask forgiveness or make amends for harm I've done to others, except when to do so would harm them or others. And step 8, that's the step that we're on tonight, says we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So tonight we're talking about amends. And this step is really closely linked to the whole concept of forgiveness. And really this brings us face to face with that horrible thing called sin. Yes, we all are SIN positive. The only thing that is certain in life, or the things that are certain in life, are what? Death, taxes, and sin, right? And really the central hypothesis, I think, going for CR is this, that those of us who have hit bottom do not need soothing words, but we need the hard gospel truth of our sin and our deliverance from it. So, forgiveness is powerful, and without it, I'm damned as an individual, as it means letting go, that I accept that all mortals are flawed and suffering, and that I accept my own responsibility. And here's the hope of good news for all of us, that doing our amends will be the beginning of the end of my isolation from others and from God. But it's really hard to start anew when my past is littered with damage and conscience is cluttered up with guilt and shame. Guilt about what I've done and shame about who I am. So tonight the acrostic is this. It's amends, not surprisingly. Admit the hurt I feel and the harm that I've done. That's the A. Make a list, the M. Encourage one another. N is not for them. D is do it at the right time. And S is start living the promises of recovery. So let's recap where we've come so far. So far, recovery has given me an altered understanding of God. And that's the first three steps, unmanageability and the fact that God can restore us to sanity and that I commit myself to Him. It has given me an understanding of myself in steps 4 through 7. And now my attention turns to the damage that I've done to others. And so a shadow crosses the stage. Step 8 is distinguished from step 9. Got it? Step 8 is all about making a list and checking it twice. The first challenge is to become willing to go to someone else and to ask for their forgiveness. And the second is to actively forgive those who have harmed me. And here, I think I have to pray for willingness to do recovery with intention. And my sponsor talks about honesty, openness, and willingness. And so what we're doing with this step is to pray for willingness. All right? I can't even think about actually going and making amends to anybody, because if I do that, it's going to interrupt the process. I will omit people on the list if I do that. All I'm doing in this step is writing. Okay, that's all we're going to do in this step, is just write some stuff down. And remember that you get to this step a long time after you've given your inventory to your sponsor. Remember, we did some writing on that. Actually, some very significant writing. I know some of you are in the midst of that right now. And if you don't have a sponsor, then really you shouldn't be doing this step anyway, because you're not all in recovery. Now, that may seem harsh, but there you have it. Amends, the word amends means to change or to improve. All right? The key here is change. It's a different nuance than restitution or recompense or restoration. That's a little bit different. It means to change. I don't want to be the same person anymore. My old way was not working. I can be different. I decided that I can become teachable. And notice again that there are two parts here. There are two sides of the same coin. I have to forgive others, and I must ask forgiveness of others. Now, this issue of forgiveness is a whole talk unto itself, and Candy will be going over this at length in another discussion. Tonight, we're just focusing on the amends process. Now, all of this may seem to be a little bit complicated and getting complicated because we're thinking about what others have done to me. That's easy for us to think about. I think the part that's difficult and complicated is what have I done to other people? It's easy for us to kind of weasel our way out of this one. Or I should speak of myself. It's easy for me to weasel my way out of this because number one, I might be unaware. Number two, I might be in full-blown denial. And number three, I may not want to feel the pain of acknowledging that, yes, I have a character defect. Actually, more than one, many. And it's no fun to look at this stuff. And recovery is not fun. It's good, but it's not fun. And really, I come face to face with my own brokenness. But see, here, we are all the same. Those of us in this room tonight, we are the same. We have the same disease, even though our versions of it may be different. Some of us in this room right now like porn. Some of us love money. Some of us are full of pride. Some of us are people pleasers. Some of us are terrible gossips. Some of us like to pump drugs and alcohol into our bodies. Some of us might be pimps. And some of us might even be child abusers. You catch my drift. We're all part of this family for a reason. And we're all broken. All of us are born slaves to our own desires. And we are born sinners. And this is not a fun thing to think about. But it's true. And it's why we're in recovery. Unfortunately, I believe I'm not scared enough of my own sin and don't have a real comprehension of what I'm truly capable of if I were left to my own devices. And God did not make me this way. I have a friend who's a Christian guy, and he's gay. And he says to me, God made me this way. Nope. God did not make him that way. Adam did. And we need to get really clear on that one. Okay? God holds each one of us responsible for Adam's sin as if it were Adam himself. Is that a hard one to swallow? There's nothing that any of us in this room can do about it. But how is this fair? This is not fair. How can any of us be responsible for something that we didn't do? I wasn't there in the garden. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the fruit the way Adam did. And notice, whose fault was it? Eve was the one that took the fruit. Eve gave it to Adam, right? But it was Adam's sin. You guys have that one clear? All right? Eve was deceived. Adam knew better. He heard it directly from the mouth of God. His sin was far worse. His sin was high-handed. Hers was that of deception. And there's a big difference. We can talk about that over a piece of pie and some coffee sometime if you want. But that's why it's called Adam's sin. But so how is it that I can be held responsible for Adam's sin as if I did it myself? Well, let's think about this differently. Imagine that you are appointed to the U.S. as U.S. ambassador to, let's say, China. What would that mean in practice? Okay, To be an ambassador for the United States in China means that you represent the entire country and you act on behalf of its subjects and their best interests. Okay? The idea is the same thing here. Does the ambassador go around and ask each one of us what we would do or what we want? No, that's not what the ambassador does. The ambassador acts on our behalf whether we like it or not. All right? If I go down to San Luis Obispo or Fresno and I walk into the federal building there and I jump up on a table and pull my pants down, they're going to hear about this in Washington, D.C. Why? Because it's a differentiated extension of what goes on in the Capitol, right? That's kind of what's going on here in terms of the concept. When Adam was created, he was the ambassador for the entire human race. And when he decided to rebel, he made his decision on behalf of all of us. God appointed Adam as the representative. He was told plainly, if you sin, you die, and everybody else with you are going to die. And that decision right there led to the carnage that we're talking about tonight. The Bible talks about it like this, is that since that fall, that terrible day, the mind of the world is hostile to God. It's spiritually dark and depraved. In fact, it does not take very long if you read from the fall in Genesis 3 to the first murder that happens in chapter 4. And 2 chapters after that, we read that the whole earth is so filled with violence that God says, I've had it. I'm going to wipe you all out with a flood. That's how bad things got. And then after that, and then with the Noah and the new creation that follows that, it's the same old, right? It's a story after story and book after book in the Bible listing all the terrible things that humans do to each other. And absolutely nothing is out of bounds. Okay? Incest, bestiality, child sacrifice, culminating now, of course, in abortion. The Bible does not sanitize any of this stuff, and it stinks. We realize that we too, in the deep, dark recesses of our soul, are more than capable of untold horrors against the rest of humanity. And it may be this can help us understand how it is that parents can abuse their children and why people commit these unspeakable acts of evil and cruelty against one another. So where does all this leave us? The problem is that I can't just turn the clock back to Eden, nor can I travel forward in time to the new creation, to the glory and beauty of the new heaven and new earth. I'm forced instead to live in this angry, violent, abusive mess that we call present reality. And we wonder if God answers our cries in our darkest moments. And why does our abuser walk around out there, roam around free? In some ways, it may be easier for me to talk about what others have done to me. It's easier to think about and speak about the grievances that I have against others because they wronged me, right? Well, what's the worst injustice I can think of? Maybe I got skipped over in a job promotion or something like that. This person over here got a promotion, and I was more deserving of that. Well, let's start with me as the victim of a perpetrator. I can't really erase this event, but you see where amends is important, is that I can revise the narrative of the event. I can see it as something that gives me more compassion and understanding toward other people. And I can learn to let go of these things. There's no good for me to establish in my mind some kind of a judicial system that will enable me to carry out in my mind punishments against these people. I mean, it's bad enough that it happened, but it's worse that I allow myself to be affected by it now over and over again. But really, how can I let my standard be so naive? Let's think about something far worse. Let's think about child abuse for a second. Who in the Bible understood something about child abuse? Well, I don't know, but I'm thinking Joseph in my mind. And Joseph had an understanding that God, the judge of all the earth, will do what is right and will act justly. Joseph is an amazing character. He's a Christ figure in the Bible. There's something like 100 different parallels between Joseph and Jesus. But he had this strong belief that God was sovereign over every detail of his life, good and bad. At least this gave meaning and purpose to his experiences. And you know what about Joseph? He never once tried to manipulate God's plan. How often do I do that? Every day. I insinuate myself into, well, gee, God, maybe you could do things a little bit better if I help you out here. In other words, Joseph's suffering was not meaningless, and his trauma was not random bad luck. What happened to him didn't matter. It wasn't without purpose. And he had a sense about the bigger picture of what God might be accomplishing for him. Okay, well, this example may be an abstraction. What about something a little bit closer to home for all of us? Few things I can think of are more horrific than for a child to be tortured by someone who was supposed to love them. The scars of this kind of abuse go deep, deeper than the burns or the lashes could ever make. And somehow, child abuse scars the soul of somebody, and it tempts that heart to never risk letting someone get close. I can tell you that as a surgeon, I've seen more than enough, and more than I care to see again of this stuff. And I have never seen child abuse like I did in Fresno. When I was an intern, I got called to see a baby with fourth-degree burns of the hands. Now, what do you think about when you hear that comment? Until proven otherwise, this is child abuse. Why? Because if it's a flash burn, propane, or a house burn, you go like this, right? You burn this part of your hand. You don't burn this part of your hand. And the other thing is that this part of your hand is really tough. So it takes a lot to burn it down to the tendon or to the bone. And it happens when you have typically a boyfriend who takes a hot iron and takes a little baby's hand and goes like this. All right? And I will never forget the kind of anger that I felt when I had to go to take care of that. Or another baby, a 3-year-old, who was held down in scalding water. This kind of thing is horrific and unimaginable, and it makes me sick to think about it even right now. I guess you can probably tell from changes in my pulse and blood pressure. How do I even talk about this subject? Easy answers on my part end up like hollow daggers for someone who has actually gone through the experience. And I should not reduce such horror to this kind of blathering that I'm doing right now and talk about worldview or apologetics. That doesn't make any sense to this kind of a person. And how do we talk to affected people who have been abused, about the eternal punishment that they will suffer if they don't give their life to Jesus? Does that make any sense at all? I'll tell you what sense it makes. Goose egg. Think about it. The threat of hell holds no fear for those who have lived through years of abuse and torment. To these people, the threat of hell sounds painfully similar to the life that they're living, right? What fear does eternal hopelessness hold to someone who feels eternally hopeless right now. It doesn't make any sense. What fear does eternal punishment hold when you're being horrifically, systematically, consistently, persistently abused day in and day out? And this stuff happens. It's happening right now in the world that we live in. But here's where it gets even harder to swallow. And this is where amends becomes really important. Despite a terrible childhood, let's say I've been abused, I would still be held responsible to God for my personal sin and my rebellion against God and His holiness. But I was a victim. I was victimized. I've been through trauma. That's my get out of jail free card. Yeah, I stole that, but I was abused when I was a child. Right? I've been waiting my whole life for other people to repent of what they did to me, when all along, God's wanting me to repent of what I have done. And there's the crux. I have sinned against a perfectly holy God. So how do I get out of this mess? And the answer on the test is always the same. The answer is always the same. And the answer is what? Jesus, exactly. Good answer. He's always the answer, the right answer. Hebrews 12:3 says this, "Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary and faint-hearted." The crux of this is that Jesus knows suffering so shocking, so profound, that it takes our breath away. And why would he go to such lengths for me? He bore the pain, humiliation, fear, flogging, cross, wrath. He was cursed. He bore the liability of my sin, like he was a common criminal, like he was a child abuser, like he was a rapist. He was cursed like he was a heroin addict, like he was a burglar, like he was a greedy businessman. Oh, like he was an arrogant doctor, like he was a vicious gossip, right? Like he was like us, okay? God's justice must be served, and his righteousness must be upheld. And none of this means that we get a free pass on our crimes. God must punish sin, and he will punish sin. He has to. And his punishment is held to us. God does not sacrifice one iota of his righteousness, and yet he is happy to have me join him in his heaven. And to that I say, how? How can that be? God is just, and yet the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. All right? So, to let you in on this secret, and I take comfort in this, there is nothing happening to us in our lives, no matter how small or how evil it may be, that's outside of the control of Almighty God. He is sovereign. We read that verse in Lamentations every week, but we don't read the couple of verses ahead of that. Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that both good and ill go forth? Why should any living mortal or any man offer complaint in view of his own sins? Right? So yes, I need forgiveness. And yes, I need to forgive others. And that's what the amend process is all about. Is God able to use child abuse to bring glory for his own name? Well, that's the Christian answer. Tell that to Joseph. Tell that to those who've endured horrible abuse. What they need to hear is that what happened to them was wrong. It was evil, and God hates that. And they need to know that there will be a day of judgment for all of their perpetrators, all of their abusers. They will get what's coming to them. They need to hear that. And I've used this as sort of a vignette for our own lives, because the second great challenge is in seeking forgiveness. It means that I have to forgive others for the harms that they had done to me. And this is an adjustment. the way we do that, we've had that list. I won't go over it again, but on the left, number 1 column and number 5 column. What they did to me, number 5, what was my part? And it needs to be specific, okay? So be prepared. The person on the list, what I did was harmful. Who suffered? The list should not be an analysis. It should be something like this. Dave, I took his bike. I shouldn't have taken his bike. I need to make amends to Dave, right? Not justifying it. Personal applications here and scrubbing my own brain. I've had a lot of anger toward my dad. My dad is dead. And there were a lot of holes in his parenting. There was a lot of dysfunction in our family. I hated him for his alcoholism, for his incompetence, and for his weakness. And yet, this is a guy who grew up during the Depression, and as a little boy, he understood the meaning. He understood what it meant to go hungry frequently, not to have a pair of shoes when all of his friends did have nice shoes. All right? He lived in that kind of an environment. He would go to Yosemite once a summer with his family on vacation. And he took his bike and he would ride his bike around the valley floor all day because he wanted to avoid his own angry father, whom he hated. You see how this generational thing keeps on going. His dad was angry, and his mom was always afraid of spending even a penny. All right? And as a young man, my dad flew the Pacific during World War II and saw all kinds of horrible things. And he didn't get paid much as an officer. He sent his money home, and he made it through the war in the Pacific. When he got home, he found out that his mom had taken the money and spent it so that they had food on the table. And he told me that as a 19-year-old man, he went to a cliff in Bolinas, looking out over the ocean, and thought about jumping. And so there's always a different perspective that we can have. And I suppose I still have to make my own amends to my dad. And I wish that he were here for me to do it. Needless to say, guess what? I repeated the same behaviors that he showed. Okay? There have been a lot of people that I've harmed by my behavior. I started drinking alcohol to numb my feelings. My temper has been out of control, and I lacked resources, and now my own son is angry toward me. You see where this is going? It's got to stop somewhere. And the way it stops is by making amends. Now, I didn't go into detail. Again, all I'm asking is just that you write it down. That's what the step 8 is about. Just make a list. You don't have to go and make the amends. That's for another day, all right? But when you do, and I hope you do, as my wife says, once the amends are done, at the very end of that, ask the question, how did you perceive me? Have I covered all the right bases? I mean, I ask forgiveness for X, Y, or Z, but is that really the problem? Do I need forgiveness for other things? What are my blind spots? Because we have to face the reality or the possibility that my amends may have nothing to do with the reality that they perceive. So I would just add that in our talk. I have to be prepared to empathize and to apologize on a dime when I go to make my amends. Okay, quickly. The E, encourage one another. Make sure you do this with your sponsor. More than anything, the sponsor will help you to slow down or to move ahead. The phrase, not for them, This is important. Don't be defensive. Don't offer excuses. Don't justify your actions in any way. Focus only on your part and don't expect anything back from them. D, do it at the right time. Timing is everything. And this may be the hardest part for you to discern, but it's very important that you have good judgment here because bad timing will ruin this. Seek God's guidance and His direction, and this is why you need a sponsor. The promises of recovery, we know them, that God promises to repay you for the years that the locusts ate. In conclusion, we're going to be facing our hurts, confronting the pain, facing the pain. The resentments and the wrongs that others have caused me or the wrongs that I have caused to others, I need to evaluate. And holding on to resentments, it's not going to do anything except block my own recovery and block God's forgiveness in my life. So become willing to make your amends and then do it, unless doing so would be harmful. Go and apologize, unless it would make things worse. I'm always happy to give you guys my slides and my notes if you're interested. I've gone way over on my time. I'm sorry about that.